Hey, a patron recently asked me if I thought the 7mm 08 Remington cartridge was big enough to handle deer and elk. To which I reply, see this 460 Weatherby Magnum throwing a 500 grain bullet? Well, the 7mm 08 Remington can do the same thing. Stay tuned to find out how on this episode of Ron Spomer Outdoors. Man, I'll tell you, we are doing some heavy lifting out here. And all of it's white and all of it's snow, and it is really coming down. Winter has landed with a fury. But I'm indoors, so we're comfortable. And we're talking about elephant cartridges? Well, not really, but sort of kinda. This is really interesting. The 7mm 08 Remington cartridge has got a long history, even though it only appeared for the first time in 1980. How does all this stuff work? Well, let's get back to the elephant thing and wrap it all together. First of all, this book, The Wanderings of an Elephant Hunter by Walter Dalrymple Maitland Bell. How's that for a name? This guy was a market hunter for ivory back at the turn of the 20th century. So roughly in 1898 through 1920, maybe. He put 16 years in hunting in Africa, and he was famous for shooting elephants with a tiny little 173 grain bullet going 2,300 feet per second of the 7x57 Mauser. He was using a Rigby rifle, and the Brits chambered it and called it the 275 Rigby. Same thing as the 757 Mauser out of Germany. That's what he used to shoot elephants. And most of us would look at this 460 or something similar with a 500 grain bullet thinking that is a suitable elephant cartridge. Well, Bell blew that whole idea right out of the water. He was averaging 1.5 bullets per elephant, and he shot over 800 of them with the 7x57. That just goes to show you what you can do with a good bullet and a good aim and knowing where to put that bullet. And that's what Bell did. If you want to read a really fascinating book about a real wilderness hunter, this is the guy you want to get this book. This is something else. It's been around for years and years, obviously. He retired a wealthy man off the proceeds of selling his ivory. So you want to probably check that one out. It's a fun book. But let's get back to a life in the 21st century and us. What do we all want to consider with this 757 and 7mm 08? How are they related? What can they do? Why should we consider either one of those for hunting in this day and age when we have a good baker's dozen of 7mm cartridges? There are a lot to pick from, but these are some of the best out there. And they all spring from the 757 Mauser that came out in 1892. Wow, Peter Paul Mauser came out with that cartridge the same time he came out with a bolt action rifle. The model 790, it would have been a 93, I believe. 92 was the first one. Then he improved it the next year, I think, called it the 93. And then he kept improving it until he finally came up with the model 98. And that is the famous Mauser that was used by the Germany and in World War I and I think into World War II. But they didn't chamber it for the 757. They used it in the 857. But the 7x57 was used by the Spanish during our war, the Spanish-American War, 1898. I think it was in June. We were in Cuba, and we were still using the 4570, and some of the 3040 Craigs had come online. But neither of those could stand up to the 757. The Spanish were really laying it on us with that. So that inspired our military brass to investigate something a little bit more effective for our next official military cartridge. Bingo. 30-06 is what came out of that. Take that 757, look closely between those two. Pretty similar. All they did was stretch it out a little bit to make the 30-06. It started as a 30-03 with a 220 grain round nose bullet, but they soon realized that that bullet was slow and dropped pretty fast because of that extra weight and the round nose. They went with the Spitzer to 150 grain bullet and then called it the 30-06. Shortened the neck on it just a trifle. So essentially, the 757 became the 30-06, and that locked us into the 30 calibers. I mean, our enemies were shooting the 7s, and we weren't going to be bothering with that. But it was still an incredible cartridge. The Brits picked it up, as I mentioned, and called it the 275 Rigby, and that's what Bell used on the elephants in Africa. Of course, he took brain shots, and that's pretty much what you need to do with an elephant anyway. And he knew that if he used a full patch military solid, 173 grain, this was a German load. So he was literally shooting 757 German ammunition in his English rifle. But it was so effective that, as I mentioned earlier, 1.5 bullets is what he averaged for every elephant that he dropped. So he was a heck of a shot. But of course, what are our ballistic performances? In this day and age, we're not so concerned about what is the cartridge going to do on an elephant as what it's going to do on deer and elk. And then you need to compare your 7s. If you're going to roll with a 7mm, which I think is a great bullet size for almost all the popularly hunted game. Talk about all the deer in North America, you're covered. Most of the plains game in Africa, you're covered. I've even taken the biggest antelope in the world, which is an African animal, the eland. They're bigger than moose. They get up to 1,800, even 2,000 pounds. And I've taken them with 7mm. No problem. I was using a 7mm Remington Magnum, but only a 140 grain bullet. I didn't even use the 175s. So let's look at some ballistic numbers and just get some comparisons going here, not with the 30-06s, just with these three. The 757, the 7-rem Mag, the 708, because I think any of them are capable of taking the same animals. It's just a matter of what ballistics you want. So here's our magical chart with some trajectories condensed. We are going to be looking at 300, 400, and 500 yard performance. Read across that top line, you see we have a maximum point blank range 0. That's where I zeroed each of these so that we would get our maximum reach on a 6-inch diameter target. So the bullet will never fly higher than 3 inches above your point of aim. And when it drops 3 inches below it, then you're at your maximum distance. So zeroing to get that achievement is under that MPBR 6-inch target column. And then we have our DDDE, that's drops, drifts, wind deflection in the middle, and then the remaining energy on the end. So on the first line, 757 Mauser, these are all now shooting a 175 grain bullet, the ELDX, which is a really high BC bullet for efficiency. At 300 yards, it's dropping 10.6 inches out of the 757 Mauser, 6.7 out of the 7mm 08. You can see already where it's a winner, and only 2.6 out of the 7-rem Mag. So it becomes obvious real quick which one's shooting the flattest just because of that powder capacity. And then on wind deflection, you notice they're a lot closer. There's only an inch difference between the 757 Mauser and the 708. And just another half inch or a little more, maybe 3/4 of an inch gain out of the 757 or the 7-rem Mag. And the reason that those are closer is because it's the bullet's BC and its ability to resist wind deflection plays more of a role than the velocity. You're going to see a lot more drop with your velocity changes, but not as much with the windage. And then your energy levels, boy, at 300 yards, they're all pretty well up there into what we would consider more than enough for an elk. You know, we like to say 1,500 foot-pounds of energy on an elk. Well, the 757 Mauser is just slipping under it at 1,475, but the 7mm 08 is staying over 1,800. And the 7-rem Mag is up at 2,514. It's got like 1,000 more than you need. Then go up to 400 yards, and yeah, you're still hanging in there pretty darn well with that 757, 1,314 foot-pounds of energy, 1,649 out of the 708, and still over 2,000, 2,268 out of the 7-rem Mag. Then go out to crazy 500 yards and look at the numbers. You're still easily in deer-taking power levels at 1,169 foot-pounds of energy out of that 757 Mauser. 1,473, I'd say that's plenty good enough for elk out of the 708. Now, who would have thought the 7mm 08 Remington would have been adequate for elk at 500 yards? But if you're coming at it from an energy perspective, the numbers sure suggest it is. And with that 175 grain bullet, and I think I've got one right here. Look at the size of that thing. That has got a lot of sectional density. We're going to discuss that here in a bit, but that helps with penetration. I think you're going to get more than adequate penetration out of that 7mm 08. And if you really want to be running the big horses, 2,041 foot-pounds of energy still remaining out of that 175 grain bullet being pushed by that 7mm Remington Magnum. Obviously, that's the big guy on the block here. Yeah, discounting some of the newer, bigger 7s that are out there, but the triumvirate of these 20th century 7mm, I think, are right here. And I don't think you can do much better or with anything else. The question is, do you want to shoot something with more recoil or less recoil? Do you want a short action or a long action? I really think it comes down to that, unless you're buying factory ammunition. And then you need to consider what you're going to be able to get. And that gets a little bit sticky. We're going to cover that in detail here in a bit too. What are the recoil differences? I have to go back to my memory here. You might want to check on my blog. I've done an in-depth blog on these 3 cartridges in which I really go into detail on all the ballistics and the numbers and the history. And I've got the recoil numbers in there. Seems to me that the big 7 in the middle here is giving you about 30 to 31 foot-pounds of recoil with that 175 grain bullet, and it's about half of that with these other 2 with the same weight bullet. So that'll give you an idea what you're up against on the recoil. So those are the 3. If, as I said, you really want to get into the details of these, go to my blog and check it out. It's a 7x57 Mauser versus a 7mm 08 Remington and 7mm Remington Magnum. 3 of what I consider our best choices in 7mm cartridges. And I think the 7 is probably right in the ballpark for a do-it-all. Most people think the 30 is better. I really can't argue. I just know that the 7 has always done it for me. And I get a little higher BCs with similar weight bullets out of the 7s. So I'm going to get a higher sectional density out of those bullets and be able to drive them perhaps a little bit faster with the same powder capacities. So I really think you're going to just find that the 7mm are going to work for everything in North America as well as Africa, except, of course, for the really big stuff. They're not going to let you play bell and take your 757 or even your 708 or even your 7 mag to go take an elephant. You're going to have to go with a 375 H&H or larger. But just the simple fact that a man more than 100 years ago could take 800 elephants with a 173 grain bullet going 2,300 feet per second out of that 757 is absolutely eye-opening. Hey, this is Ron Spomer. I want to thank all of our patrons, especially the gentleman who asked this question. Yes, the 7mm 08 is adequate for deer and elk. Just use the right bullet, put it in the right place. It's got more than enough horsepower to do the job. And I invite all of you to subscribe to our channel if you like what we're doing here. Really appreciate that. And we're going to have extended versions of this sort of thing on RonSpomerOutdoorsTV.com. We're getting a lot of support there. A lot of folks are joining up and reporting they're liking what we have. Everything we've ever done on that channel stays there, so you can just spend your time going through and clicking on any subject that you think interests you, and we're going to continue to add to it every week. This is Ron Spomer signing off. Hunt honest and shoot straight.